versus, again, I want to say Mark, where he's much more standoffish about it, right? Don't tell anybody that this happened. Keep it a secret. Verses 18 to 19 are a paraphrase of Isaiah 61, 1-2, and 58, 6. It says, Isaiah 61 alludes to the year of Jubilee, when debts were canceled, slaves were freed, and property was returned. Joel Green notes several reasons why this passage in Luke is important. It represents the first spoken words of Jesus in the gospel as an adult. It's the only place in Luke where the content of his synagogue teaching is given. It's later referred to in Luke and Acts as evidence that Jesus is the Christ, and, as I noted a minute ago, it's at the beginning of his public ministry. I always find it interesting, and I like that he sometimes will point this out, the things that are unique about it, because sometimes it's not obvious, right? I think way back when we were studying John, John is interesting because there are a number of things that it doesn't mention. It never mentions Pharisees, even though they're clearly there. It also never mentions hell, which, believe it or not, Paul also never mentions hell. In all of his letters, it never comes up. He alludes to judgment and punishment, but Paul never explicitly mentions hell. Just interesting things to note. Again, it doesn't mean that it's not there, but I enjoy that he'll point these things out. Green also notes the emphasis the original Greek places on the words "me" and "release" by putting them at the end of the phrases that they're found in. One of the things I found interesting about, granted, I am not a Greek scholar. I don't know that I could even recite the Greek alphabet at this point. It's been so long since I went to school. But one thing that I recall from when I was in Memphis about Greek is the order of the words is totally different. And sometimes you can show emphasis by changing the order of the words, just like he mentions here. Like in English, it is super, super important. And in fact, I wish I had it in front of me, but in English, there's a certain order that adjectives have to go in, always. And it's not true of other languages. Like if you're studying French or Spanish or German, whatever, it's not like this. But in English, the order that adjectives go in makes a tremendous, tremendous difference. I'm trying to think of an example. Off the top of my head, nothing's coming to me. But in Greek, it's just all over there would be times when we would have an exercise. It's like, take this Greek and translate it to English, and it almost seemed like it was just a random grab bag of words thrown onto the page, right? So sometimes the order doesn't matter so much. It's more to do with the endings of the things. And it's cool because then you can also tell a lot about the author because of the way that they tend to order things. But anyway, like he's pointing out here, in this particular case, the way that the words are ordered in the sentence indicates emphasis on certain ideas within it. And that's cool. Bringing together the elements learned from our study of forgiveness thus far, this passage stresses that Jesus' work is part of the master plan of God by pointing out the Spirit and the fact that he anointed me. It says his role as the proclaimer and provider of liberty is emphasized. Liberty is a translation of the Greek word aphesis, which we noted earlier is a key term for forgiveness. It alludes to more than the release from physical difficulties. It's also a metaphor for liberty from sin. Much like is often the case, you have various New Testament references back to the Exodus out of Egypt. Paul notes this several times, kind of connecting this to the idea that God delivered the Israelites out of bondage in Egypt, and in the very same way, God delivers people out of the bondage of sin. This liberty is for all, poor, captive, blind, and oppressed. Consistent with the emphasis Luke places on the availability of salvation for all humanity, again, as I pointed out last time, many people would not agree with that. They would say salvation is available to the elect, not to everyone. But again, Luke emphasizes this. These verses can also serve as a bridge to the teaching of Paul. Paul later elaborated on why humanity needed the salvation Christ proclaimed and how he provided it. And I love, he points out at the end of this, here at the top of page 67, how you can get an idea in one writing and then have another writer that elaborates on it. My personal favorite example of this, and again, it's something I've said before, you have Romans, which is Paul's most thorough writing about forgiveness, atonement, and all these things. He's very, very detailed. He's extremely thorough. And then you have, alongside it, Galatians. Galatians is much shorter. In my personal opinion, it's easier to read, just because it isn't so thorough and so dense. It's easier to read. But you've got the exact same situation and the exact same situation and subject at hand in both of them. In fact, Paul uses some of the exact same metaphors in both letters. So I would say to anyone who was curious, if you're having a bit of trouble following or working your way through Romans, read Galatians, right? Because it's the exact same message, the same subject, the same problem, but it's a little bit, again, in my personal opinion, a little bit easier to digest. And then you can kind of compare the two where they're similar and get a better understanding. But even more to the point of what he's saying here, Hebrews. Hebrews to me is almost like an appendix to Romans and Galatians. Because in Romans and Galatians, Paul talks a great deal about how the New Testament is better than the Old, about how salvation is now available to all. But he doesn't go into a lot of detail about why. He says it, but he doesn't get into a lot of the nitty-gritty behind how it works. In Hebrews, that is the case, right? In Hebrews, you get a lot of detail and a lot of dense writing about why it is that the New Testament is superior to the Old. And you got a lot of these examples about the high priest having to go back and back over time after time for the same sins. So if you take it all together, you get a pretty clear picture. But sometimes it takes reading the idea in one book and then kind of jumping to another that builds more on it. Does that make sense to everyone? So like Romans, you get this Old versus New Testament. But then if you go over to Hebrews, it fleshes it out even more, and you get an even clearer understanding about it. Okay, moving on to the peace of God. Have you ever looked at the moon through a telescope? No. Maybe some of y'all have. Fascinating and peaceful. In 1969, Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin placed a plaque on the moon in a region called the Sea of Tranquility. The plaque reads, "We come in peace for all mankind." The moon's a peaceful place, but only so because few humans have been there. I love that statement. The only reason it's peaceful is because people haven't gone. I don't know if y'all ever heard the joke either, but it says, people ask, is there intelligent life out there in the universe, or on other planets out in the galaxies? And they say probably so, and the surest sign of it is the fact that they haven't come here. So I don't know, but I love this statement. The only reason it's peaceful is because humans haven't been there to disturb it. Sadly, a lot of truth in that. It says, where humans go, there's little peace. It's no different when God is involved. We struggle to have peace with him as well. Yet, Romans 5:1 says, we have peace with God. To understand what it means to have peace with God, we must consider what it means to be the enemy of God. Peace is often lost between people and nations when one hurts the other, or when one breaks an agreement made between the parties. We have done that to God. It is called sin. Talked about it before. Sin, hamartia. It's a Greek word that literally means to miss the mark. An archer shoots an arrow at a target. He doesn't hit the bullseye. He has sinned, right? Literally, he has sinned. He has missed. He has failed. And I think I mentioned this because I was curious because I'd always heard the Greek word hamartia. Sin, missing the mark. And one day, I was sitting there and I wondered, well, what about in the Old Testament? What about sin? And I don't remember the Hebrew word for it, but interestingly enough, it also meant to miss the mark. And there's a passage in Judges, I don't recall the exact verse off the top of my head, but there's a passage in Judges where it's talking about the Israelites training to become a more formidable fighting force. And it says, there was not one among them who ever missed with the sling, right? You think about like David with the sling and the stones. And sure enough, the word there that's translated missed is the exact same word that's also translated sin in other places in the Old Testament. So that's literally what it means. You have an aim, you have an objective, and you miss. That's what it means to sin. So he talks about the fact that doing this to God, doing harm, breaking an agreement is called sin. In what way? What is the basic fundamental idea there behind sin? And maybe this ties a little bit, just to give you a clue to kind of what I'm thinking here. I've talked a lot before about the idea of confessing sin. Does anyone happen to recall? Homologos. What does it mean to confess sin? Or do you hear that term, homologos? What does it mean? Same word, right? Literally, homologos, same words. So if you're confessing sin, what is the idea? Same words. God says you sinned, right? What you did was wrong. So if I confess it, I say what I did was wrong. It's the same words. God says what I did was wrong. I say what I did was wrong. I'm confessing, right? To confess Christ. God says this is my son. What does it mean to confess Christ? I say, this is God's son, right? Same words. I'm saying the same thing that God says. We are in agreement with one another. If I've sinned and I say, I didn't do anything wrong, I'm not confessing. If I say, I didn't do anything, right? I'm not confessing. Confessing literally means to say the same words. God says it was wrong. I say it was wrong. I'm confessing it. The idea of sin, the most basic, simple idea, it means to miss the mark. It means that God has set forth expectations for what I'm supposed to do as His creation. And if I fail to meet them, that's sin. Does that make sense to everybody? It's like someone has set a target, they've told me to shoot at it, and I miss. The expectation was you're going to hit the bullseye. What actually happened is it went flying out in left field and stuck in someone's leg, right? I missed. I sinned. I didn't do what I was supposed to do. So, this failure to meet God's expectations is what drives a wedge between myself and God, right? In the Old Testament, Isaiah, sin separates man from God. You have the same idea in the New. He notes here, 1 John 3:4, that sin is called lawlessness. Again, God's law, God's expectations, the way that He has told us as His creation to live and to behave. I fall short of that. I fail to meet it. I've sinned. All right, Lord willing, next time. Now, next week, Brother Knupp will be here. So hopefully the week after that, we'll pick back up with that idea here, mid-page 67. But thanks for y'all's attention.